Yes.
Okay. So I'm going to be talking about a little bit about how open source is being used in South Asia, specifically India, though most of what I say can be also applied to the other countries in the Indian subcontinent. But most of my experiences with India. And I'm also going to be talking about DebConf, which is a project that we're trying to get off the ground to increase the visibility of Debian specifically in India. So I think it has a lot of advantages for the people of India. Let's put this down. Okay. So, why this is important is because if you saw, Christian's map yesterday, he's showing all the red areas where, Debian has been localized, and there's like a big white patch. The biggest one was over South Asia. And that's a concern because, India has a population of like a billion. If you add all the other countries, some of them also have a very high population growth. There's almost a quarter of the human race is in that area, and in the past it's had a lot of problems with poverty and so on. But things are looking better everywhere, really. People aren't at least starving to death anymore. And increasingly they're beginning to have a little extra income. They're beginning to think about more than just survival and actually making some progress and moving ahead in the world. And a big part of the story of modern civilization has been computers and computing. And this is something that's only going to become more and more important as the 21st century goes on. So South Asia also needs to be able to benefit from this. There. Huh? Right, my slides don't seem to want to. I can use page up and page down as well. Ah, big computers. It's a slideshow thing as well.
Change that manually?
Yeah, that's probably what I need. There we go. Oops. Doesn't want this thing to go past this slide.
You prepare more?
I do. I hope I do.
On the next slide. Yeah.
Excuse me?
And from the down there is the introduction, title, overview. Does it take the slide from there?
Yeah, it should.
Pick up that, yeah, thumbs on the bottom.
Alright.
Yeah.
Okay. It's going to suck if I have to keep doing that every time. I'm going to do that. Alright, well, there's any number of people who are willing to help you use computers. I mean, Microsoft actually have been really investing a lot of effort into trying to, get India and the countries around it to start using their software. But it's not a good fit all the time because proprietary software is inflexible. For the longest time, Microsoft had as a checklist item support for Indian languages. But it was horrible. It was not really working the way it was supposed to do. Plus, they didn't localize very much. I think it was basically just Office, and even then, not properly. But if you're relying on proprietary software, you're stuck because you have to wait until they decide to fix things. So there isn't that flexibility there. And as I'll be explaining later on, there's a lot of different languages in India. But typically, when the commercial software vendors do bother localizing anything, they only pick like the top, 2 or 3. And that means you're out of luck if you speak a minority language. Furthermore, proprietary software companies are unaccountable. If they decide to discontinue their product lines or switch to something else, you don't have any recourse. You either have to take it or do without. And again, if you don't necessarily want to be at the mercy of the agenda of some other country miles and miles away, if you have your own particular needs. Proprietary software is unstandardized. I mean, well, okay, so they do follow some basic standards, but many times a proprietary software company will extend and embrace or just tinker with things or come up with their own pseudo standard, just to get like some kind of market advantage. And that's not very good when you're trying to grow the whole market in the first place. Having commonly supported standards is vital to getting a free market going. And lastly, and I put this last for a reason, proprietary software costs a lot, and in a country where there are a lot of poor people, that places a huge burden. Not as big a burden as you might think, because like in many other places in the third world, there's rampant piracy going on. But if you want to be legal, you have to pay a lot of money. And actually, it's funny that now that the big proprietary companies are putting more into like enforcing patents and copyrights and things, they're actually making free software look even more attractive, because people know that they can't necessarily get away with just making bootleg copies anymore. But free software can solve all these problems. I'm going to try. See if I can go to the next slide. Yep. Yay! The goals of DebConf is to provide a free base for technical and social progress. Because the two often go hand in hand. Not everyone cares equally about either. Some people are more interested in the social side, some people are more interested in the technical side, but still, both areas can benefit from having a free foundation that's reliable and usable for the things that they want to do, not what somebody thinks that they should do. We also want to advocate the use of Debian GNU Linux in the Indian subcontinent. What I'm finding as I explore this further myself, by the way, although I'm of Indian origin and I'm heavily involved in Indian culture, I actually live in the United States. So I'm kind of at an arm's distance from what's actually going on, but I try and keep up with these things. We're finding that Debian is still a very unknown quantity, because the thing is that with the communications not being that well, most of the information that people have about Linux comes from marketing. And so if you're a company that does marketing, like Red Hat does, or like Sun does, or IBM does, then you can get your particular message out there. Debian, historically hasn't really cared much about marketing even. It's not even a question of whether we're good at it or not. We've just, our attitude has always been, we'll let the distribution speak for itself. Which is fine when, people know, more about the Linux world and the free software world. But when they're completely new, it just, it's not even an option that they think about. So, we just want to, maybe, speak at lugs, or, get like articles in magazines, or things like that. Just get the name of Debian out there. We're not going to, do any kind of very glitzy, endorsed by supermodels kind of TV advertisement, but just just get the word out that there is this thing for Debian, and if you try it, you may find that you really like it. And also, we want to get the free software hackers that are in India, to get more involved in the wider free software movement, because that's another thing I'm going to be talking about later. Is the problems of like bandwidth and just geographic isolation that people have. There's I don't know if you remember seeing it, but like a couple of weeks ago, there was a message on, I think it was Debian Project, by somebody from the eastern state of Orissa. It's like on the east coast, just below Kolkata. He was saying that I'm a poor student, but I'm interested in Linux. But can you send me some CDs or something? So I actually wrote back to him privately and said that, well, do you know that in the capital of your state, there's a Linux users group, and you can go there and they can help you, burn CDs. It would be more convenient, I think, than having foreign people send them to you, and also they can help you, install and get started. And he replied that, well, one, no, I didn't know that there was such a thing, and two, even if there was, that's still a good like 250 miles away from me. So that's not somewhere I can necessarily go, like every weekend or something. But so this is a problem. If you're in a big cosmopolitan city like Mumbai or Chennai or Delhi, then you don't have so much problems because there's more outside contact. People are beginning to get like DSL cable modems, that kind of thing. But even then, they have more problems than you would if you were living in Europe or North America. So we want to do things that we can to help people know what else is going on out there as well. So the situation in India is that it's very diverse, has a very ancient history, so there's been all kinds of movements of people in and out. And there are 18 languages which are recognized by the Indian Constitution. However, there are many more languages than that which don't have official status but still have maybe 1 million or more speakers. We're talking about a lot of diversity. I'm reminded, I think it was Alexander Pope who defined a language as a dialect with an army and navy. And while that's not literally true in this case, it is true in the sense that, the definition of a language versus a dialect, or where one language starts and another one ends and so on, that is actually, involves a bit of politics as well as just, simple linguistics. I'll give you an example. Hindi is the main language. It's the most widely spoken language in India, and it's like out of the 18, it's the official one. But in Pakistan, they speak Urdu. Now, the partisans of each language would tell you that these are totally different languages. In fact, a Hindi speaker can understand 99% of Urdu, and vice versa. The only difference is Hindi is written in one script, Urdu is written in Arabic script. Hindi has been more influenced by Hindu ideas, Urdu has been more influenced by Muslim ideas. So, there's definite differences there, but the core is actually something that's, fairly common. But, you could try to get people to admit that, and sometimes you'll run into resistance because it's not patriotic or whatever. But actually, Urdu is actually one of the languages recognized in India as well, because there are still people who speak it. But I'll go on more about that later on. These languages belong to two basic linguistic families, the Indo-European, or Indo-Aryan as it's called sometimes, which is very strongly related to the European languages as well, for the most part, except for Finnish. And Dravidian, which is the 4 South Indian languages, Tamil, Telugu, Malayalam, and Kannada. And of course, there's been a lot of cross-pollination, but there's definite linguistic differences between the two groups. The Indo-European languages in India are descended from Sanskrit for the most part. While the South Indian languages, they've been influenced by Sanskrit, but they're not directly linguistic descendants of it. And I'm mostly going to be discussing the Indo-European languages, mainly because I'm not actually that familiar with the Dravidian ones. But much of what I'm going to say is in common to both. And all these languages, for the most part, use scripts which are on the same basic model, which I'll also explain in a bit. The exceptions are Kashmiri, Sindhi, and Urdu, which use the Arabic script. So while you know, our idea with DebConf is to welcome anyone who speaks those languages to join the project, I think just as a practical matter, they might feel more at home with like the Persian and Arabic localization people, because they have more in common, technological problems and so on, like right to left writing than we do. Yes?
I just wanted to say that when I and several people in Israel try to get BD support, we're trying to get involvement from Arabic people and several from especially Urdu people. But we don't have people to be our point of contact and so on.
Yeah.
But mostly the support is there. We just need someone to translate.
Right.
Nothing more.
I mean, I don't want to get into a possible flame war about this, but a big difference has been that India has been a democracy and fairly stable, while Pakistan has had more military dictatorships and so on, fundamentalism and all that. So it's kind of behind technologically. There are actually several people in India who are interested in doing the Urdu localization. And I'm trying to get them maybe to get involved, if they decide to get involved with Debian, to like contribute to some of these things. And I'm sure that there are some people in Pakistan too, but their whole situation is like, I would say about 10, 20 years behind where India is even. But I'm not going to get too much into that, because that way lies madness.
You can send them to me if there are some bidirectional problems. We're already working on it.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Now, as I mentioned, there are different scripts used to write Indian languages. I think there's a few tribal languages in the far northeast where they use the Roman script, because they were only reached by like missionaries or something early in the 20th century or something. So they're not really part of the Indian cultural sphere, even though they might be in the geographical region of India. But most of the Indian scripts are related, whether they're from North Indian or South Indian languages. And of the languages in this list over here, Assamese, Bangari, and Manipuri use the Bangari script. They use the same script. Hindi, Konkani, Marathi, Nepali, and Sanskrit use Devanagari, which I'm going to be explaining about. So they all have the same script. And the other languages all have the same script. And if you look at them, you can see the similarities, but they've diverged over time. And other countries that were influenced by Indian culture in the past often also have a similar kind of script structure. This includes Sinhala, which is spoken in Sri Lanka, Thai, and Tibetan. And of these, we have Thai and Tibetan fonts, but I don't think we have a Sinhala one. But for all the Indian scripts, we have fonts in Debian for them now. And I want to make the point that the languages and scripts are not necessarily corresponding one-to-one. There are several cases where you can write a language in different scripts. One example is Punjabi. Punjab is the region in the northwest of India but after partition, half of it is in Pakistan. But Punjabi speakers in Pakistan use the Arabic script, while Punjabi speakers in India use the Gurmukhi script, it's called. That's like the native script of Punjabi, or they can sometimes use Devanagari as well. Some of the scripts have like extensions to cover sounds which are non-native, like North Indian languages don't have a native Z sound. Their J is the nearest. But that's why, like, if you've heard like an Indian speaker say like zero instead of zero, you know, that's because they don't have that Z sound. But there's been like an extended Devanagari character. You can put like a dot under the J, and that signifies Z if you want to explicitly show that this is a different sound. And you know, that's especially important for like foreign loan words. So you know, that's the situation with scripts. The wrong way. Let's do it again.
How many scripts are in total?
There's about 10 major ones. I think as far as Unicode is concerned, you know, Unicode is the attempt to, you know, consolidate all the world's scripts. There are currently, I think, 10 index scripts which have code blocks. But that's not all the various scripts that are out there even, but those are like the main ones. So this is Devanagari, and Devanagari, very early on in the history of India, linguistics became important because, you know, language has always been thought of as like the supreme human invention. Kind of like, you know, how we say like fire is like the original invention, you know, in Western culture, that's like the image. So speech was a big preoccupation of ancient Indians. So they did a lot of analysis of speech and so on. So the alphabets are typically laid out in a linguistic pattern. Like,
they aren't alphabets.
yeah, they're not alphabets. The scripts. They're, yeah, but use the words interchangeably. But each glyph represents a sound. And the sounds are organized. First we have the vowels, then you have you know, compound vowels or diphthongs, then the consonants are arranged in terms of you know, velars, palatals, retroflex, and so on. And you have semivowels, and you have fricatives, as they're called. Sh, sa, and h. So you know, it's a very musical sounding thing if you say the whole thing, but all the index scripts are based on the same model, and in fact you could well, there are a few minor variations, but you could even you know, just algorithmically, you know, convert from like one script to another, you know, just by in Unicode, they're arranged in blocks of 128 code points. So, you know, by adding and subtracting, you could do a mechanical translation like that. Might not necessarily mean anything, but at least in terms of pronunciation, it would be the same. And each of the vowels here, this is the, you know, full form of the vowel, and for the consonants, you have an inherent vowel, because is the most common vowel. So let me actually go over to here it. This is my name in Devanagari. And it's just the, you know, the characters J, L, D, R, so Jaldhar. Though, I mean, it's not entirely phonetic in some cases because, for example, in my language, Gujarati, we tend to drop the at the end of a syllable. So it should actually be in Sanskrit Jaldhar, but I pronounce it Jaldhar. But those are basic consonants. But in my surname Vyas, we have a situation where we have a compound consonant, and so like this is a V, and this is Y, but it's not Vyas, it's Vyas. So you combine them by there's a symbol for this called Helen, which is like that, which makes it, which removes the vowel from a consonant or consonant cluster. So this is now just V. Now I can combine it with Y, like this. So now this is Vya. Now check out the long R sound. I do this. This is the joined version of that A vowel that came on the list before. So Jaldhar Vyas, this is how I would write my name in Sanskrit or Hindi or whatever. So the problem with this, as far as computers are concerned, is that, as you can see, there's already way more than 26 glyphs in the original set. When you count all the combinations, you can easily, to have a complete font, need like between, I would say, 800 to 1,000 different symbols. Because there's actually even 3 consonant clusters as well, and possibly even 4, but those are very rare and only really in like Sanskrit words or something as well. Mostly it's just 2. But still, you need to have that. So any system that's going to display Indic languages has to have that shaping ability, and sometimes also the order changes of the symbols as well. So this has historically been a huge problem in getting any kind of Indic support into computers, but now it is possible under X at least, but it's still impossible to really display Indian languages on any kind of console mode program. It can actually show up, but it doesn't look very good. Yes?
Well, this is just something I remember. I understand this script is way more complicated, but I remember still from the early days before graphical interfaces were common.
Mm-hmm.
Seeing also in console mode written Arabic that each letter also modified the previous one.
Right.
I mean, I was at the border point just staring at the in fascination.
But even Arabic at least has the benefit of the characters are mostly like the same size. But here, like a proper representation of a character can be variable in width. And that's been, the thing that's really hard to do. There are actually, like, even in the days of DOS, there were like add-ons you could get to display Indian languages, but they just didn't look very good at all. You couldn't imagine, most people using that kind of thing. So typically, what they did was just some kind of transliteration scheme into, the Latin alphabet. So there are fonts out there, but unfortunately another problem that we've had is that the people who do the fonts have just, put characters all over the place. So, there's no real encoding in a lot of these fonts. And that's a big problem for especially, my parents like to visit like newspaper websites to get the latest news about what's going on. But it seems like every newspaper's website has its own font that you have to install, because if you have the wrong font, it just looks like gibberish because they didn't match up, the characters in the same places. There are some standards Previously, the main standard in use was called ISCI, the Indian Standard Code for Information Interchange, which is an 8-bit encoding. The lower 128 characters are the same as ASCII, and in the upper 128 characters, they have all the different characters that are needed for an Indic script. And because all the scripts are on the same basic model, you just need 1 byte in advance to identify which script it is. Then you can use, like for instance, this Vyas, like, I showed it in Devanagari. In Gujarati or Punjabi, it would look different, but it would still be the same half V, Y, and A. So, you can have a neutral encoding for those and just have 1 byte in front saying, it's this language as opposed to that language. But that's still not really that, good, and it's not even really been that widely adopted. I think it's mainly the government that used it. The future is Unicode, which, when the ISO people were getting that together, they actually sat down and actually thought about, the issues involved with Indic scripts. So, as far as the Linux world is concerned, and I think really Microsoft, Sun, all the operating system people, they're just not bothering with ISCI, and they're just using Unicode and UTF-8. So the fonts that we have are typically in the OpenType format, which is a superset of TrueType, but allows for the conjunct characters and things. It's a bit more descriptive, but it's basically the same as that. So, there does have to be some special support in the application because of the need to shape the characters. But it's still, most programs that use TrueType fonts can at least show something. But there is shaping support provided in the toolkits, such as Qt or GTK. Pango is the actual library that does that. And it's pretty usable, and I would say it's at least as good, and in some ways even further ahead than what Microsoft has. I think Microsoft is only going to have like really 100% accurate support for Indian languages in Longhorn whenever that's supposed to come out. And even then, it will probably only be for like the top 6 or 7 Indian languages. And of course, who knows when like Adobe or Macromedia or anyone will get around to it. So I think we have a good window of opportunity to really get Linux into India, not just as Me Too, but as really an innovation, as really ahead of the competition. And I think if that happens and Linux becomes entrenched, no matter what kind of schemes or cut price promotions or whatever the proprietary vendors do, they won't be able to get past. But that depends on a lot of work getting done, and it remains to be seen if we can actually do it, but I hope that we can. The input of characters is done via input methods. There's many different ones. Wow, I was talking that long. But they're done by input methods such as SCIM, IIMF, Qt has its own, and the translations are just done using getText and PO files, just like anywhere else. So I'm going to skip ahead a few. I was going to talk about some of the political issues, but if you attended the talk on Latin America, you kind of know some of that, because it's the same basic things. Third world countries tend to have like this really dead weight bureaucracy that just doesn't do anything useful but interferes with things. There are some good signs too. The President of India, the President is a very ceremonial position actually. The real power is in the Prime Minister's hands, but it has a lot of respect. And the President, Abdul Kalam, is been spoken out favorably about free software and Linux in the past. So even if he can't actually achieve anything by himself, at least he gives prestige to the idea of using Linux. And that's, very useful in countering the kind of people who say that, it's just a toy or it's not, supported or whatever. There's some cultural issues involved in getting free software adopted. Some of them good, and some of them not so good. One is that language is a marker of social status, and so people want to see their language, become involved with computers, not because necessarily they have any idea of using it themselves, but then they can say that, see, our language is so modern because it's used on computers and so on. So that's actually made, people kind of receptive to having all these localization projects, just for the prestige value. Also, a good thing is that Indians are very pro-science and technology. You don't have that problem of, because, like, for instance, in Hindu holy books, like, the Earth is shown as being like a flat disk supported on 4 elephants, supported on a turtle. But, like, there's no one, not even the most, fundamentalist person, and I'm a very devout Hindu myself, who would try and, like in America there's an issue right now that people are trying to get biblical creationism into the textbooks, that the earth was created in 6 days, and so on. There's nothing like that going on in India. And people really value, technology and so on, so they're receptive to new ideas in that way. One problem I'm seeing is that Indians I work with, they like to be told what to do. They like to have like a master plan, and somebody gives them a task, and then they'll go and do it, and they're not lazy about doing it. But the free software community is more about finding a niche and scratching it. So we need to get them more acclimatized to a different way of doing things. We don't just wait for me to tell you what to do. Find something you're interested in doing and do it. The other problem is that the education system is so specialized. Like, if you're an arts person, chances are you know nothing about science. If you're a science person, you can barely, sign your name. And with translations especially, translations can't just be mechanical. You have to have like a kind of poetic flair as well. But like, I'm trying to get, like, for instance, my mother is a poet in Gujarati, in our language. But she's like utterly computer phobic. I'm trying to get her to get involved with, translations and so on. But the idea is that, that's why I have a son to do computers for me. What do I need to bother with any of this stuff for? I'm, up in the clouds somewhere. But so, that's very frustrating because, if there was a bit more mix of skills, I think that would help a lot. Infrastructure, like I mentioned, is still a problem. In big cities, you get cable and DSL and so on, but it's not always reliable. If you're in a village or something, then forget it. Actually, an interesting thing I found out, I was talking to somebody, and he said that practically everyone he knows has a DVD burner. Now, I don't even have one myself in my computer, so I asked why that was, and he said, because sometimes it's so much easier to just get like a distro, burn it on a DVD, and then, like, take it to somebody's house rather than try and, FTP stuff and send things around like that. And, this is a problem because, like, God forbid trying to, follow Debian Devel on the 28.8 modem. It's just like, it's way too much to keep up with. So this means that the people who are interested in free software, who are hacking, are not really often in tune with what's going on in the rest of the world. And, more and more people have disposable income now. It's not the case that India is like poverty-stricken. Even poor people often have like some money, but, they're more concerned with, making a living than with, doing charity work, which is what free software really is. And the other thing is that, they don't want to just, have, some kind of cut price bargain solution. They want to spend their money wisely. But it looks like I'm out of time, but don't know, I had a few.
There's a
few
talk
other-
after this. That's why, which start
Yeah, I know.
in 5 minutes, and we need preparation for it.
All right, can I maybe talk until people start coming in? They haven't started coming in yet. It's just
Yeah.
a few other things I wanted to mention. The other thing is that many of the Indian languages, you know, you actually have to invent the technical vocabulary because they've just never been used. You know, some languages have prestige, but others are just like, you know, for the peasants. So they've never really developed any kind of, you know, high terminology. And so, you know, and also we have the problem of making translations, you know, culturally coherent. Because not all, you know, like all the little Western in-jokes make sense, you know, to people in India. Some free software groups. So what has DebConf done so far? Well, we have a logo, and you know, that's been our major achievement so far. But we have also packaged fonts at least for some of the scripts. But there's more that needs to be done to have, you know, a properly usable system. So in the future, we're going to do things like, especially when we get graphical installer, we're going to do localization of that, DebConf messages, some documentation. There's other things that need to be packaged. Like I said, we want to help Indian hackers join the global communities, and maybe make like a live CD or a CDD, something like that. And so how can Debian help? Well, you can feel free to join us if you're interested. I was thinking maybe if one day we can have, you know, DebConf in Bangalore, or at least, you know, somewhere near like Singapore, someplace where it's easier for Indians to visit. Because I have a bunch of people who are interested in becoming Debian developers, but the sticking point is getting the key sign because there's no one around. There's 2 developers currently living in India, but they're all very far away from each other. And so if you're in India on a holiday or something, or on some business trip, and you know of some like log meeting or something, go by and sign keys. That's a way to help. And otherwise, just keep on being Debian, because you know, even the stuff that you do which is not related to India whatsoever does help, because by increasing the pool of free software out there, you're creating something that everyone can use. So, thank you very much. And feel free to talk to me about any of these issues at any time.